Jim, a couple of questions specific to India, but not specific to the crisis. When Moody's downgraded, I'm just using their analysis, not so much their downgrade. They downgraded India, and they pointed out very clearly that the deterioration in India's growth over the last few years, starting 16, 17, that is a point of concern to them. That we haven't actually moved towards what was considered potential. Does India's growth performance disappoint you?
It's been very interesting in the last few years. And of course, it starts to make one wonder whether many of us overestimated India's growth potential in the first place. And it's hard to tell because there has been a combination of global shocks as well as domestic Indian policy disappointments. But I think it sort of goes back to the nature and the specificity of policy. The Modi government has often talked a very good game about structural policy reform, but when it's come to it, it's often shied away from it. If I go all the way back to a piece I published in my days as chief economist of Goldman, along with a colleague of mine in Mumbai at the time, on 10 things for India to do to achieve its potential, India has not got close to delivering on hardly any of those things. And it's education, it's health provision, it's specific things to do with trade policy, it's opening up in terms of investment policy. And India has simply not done any of those things. And until it does, it's going to be difficult for India to get to the double digits rates of economic growth that in theory, its remarkable demographics give it the opportunity to achieve.
That demographic, Jim, is increasingly, I don't want to use the word burden, but it's increasingly looking at like a drag, right? From everything we know, although we don't have real jobs data, it doesn't look like the economy is producing enough jobs to get that demographic into the consumer space and then investment, etc. Is that a big problem? Is that one of the bigger problems that needs to be tackled?
I think it is a huge problem, and this underlies the whole long-term debate about India. And this is something that should attract the attention more of global policymakers as we move to a situation where China's demographics have started to turn, and a world in which China has primarily been responsible for lifting the growth performance of the world economy in the last 20 years. And as China demographics turn and China can't grow so much, there is only one other country in the world that has a sufficiently large population and a sufficiently large economic base in order to have the slightest chance of replacing that, and it's India. And so if India could turn the demographic advantage into a true dividend, it would be incredibly important for the world. History, for countries with very explosive population dynamics, if they can't raise their growth potential, this ends up becoming a major burden. And it's an issue, and has been an issue sadly for decades for Africa. And in India's case, since the early 90s, it looked like India was starting to get on a much stronger positive path. But somehow the past 5 or 6 years, India seems to have lost its way a little for a number of reasons, some of which are external. But one of the great things of having such a large population, particularly given at a time of such challenges about international trade, India does have the potential to determine all of this itself. And one of the ironies of not being as strong international trade participants as it could be, which is the case with India, that means that its economy is greatly driven by domestic forces. And so if India could do more to turn that demographic advantage into true productivity benefit, the potential for India would just be spectacularly exciting.